This is Rock and Roll Grad School with your hosts Heidi Hedquist and Luke Poling. First-time callers, long-time listeners.
Hello, kiddies. We're going to have a good time together. How are you doing, Heidi? You're tired?
I'm exhausted.
But are you ready for the gathering tonight?
I am not going to the gathering tonight. Are you ready?
I should be, but for someone who doesn't... But wait a second. For someone who doesn't shut up about Detroit, suddenly the Insane Clown Posse's gathering of the Juggalos are just like, I'm too good for this.
I didn't say I was too good for it.
I see.
I have been busy working on
That's
our
true.
behalf in New York. I have been a Brooklynite for 3 days.
This is true. So the EP Pug Ugly is coming out on Friday.
Okay.
And they say it will be exclusively available at the gathering starting today. So if you just want to swing by on your way home from work.
Isn't the gathering not here, though? I think that's part of my issue.
Oh, maybe.
I believe they took it out of state, and I'm not down with that.
Okay, well, fine.
Is it in Ohio?
I'm looking. That might be right, given that. Okay, gathering the Juggalos. You're right, Legend Valley, Ohio, the 3rd through the 6th. Well,
I've been to their show.
But you haven't been to the gathering.
I've not been to the gathering. I've had pancakes at Denny's a table away from them.
All right.
And
So
2 good ICP stories. So
that's true. But so if you happen to be in Ohio and are at the gathering, you can pick out the new EP. However, there is something that we need to download immediately and then spend the rest of our week messing around with.
Okay.
Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope also have created their own Instagram filter.
Oh, yes.
Which will allow users to wear either Violent J or Shaggy 2 Dope's iconic clown makeup.
Who do you want to be?
I want to take everybody from the Mudhouse family of podcast networks and put them in ICP makeup.
We could do that.
We could totally. And I would say no one's going to notice it, but no one's going to notice it.
Our friends and fans will notice it.
This is true, yes. And hopefully Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope.
Right?
So, and we'll have to email our friend Amy and let her know we're discussing this so that she knows we are down with the sickness or whatever. What did they say? We're not juggalos, I don't think.
Not quite.
Yeah.
We could be at some point.
We could. Speaking of which, their documentary film, United States of Insanity, very, very fun, or very good film about their fight with the FBI, about the accusations of being labeled as gang members. But we're not here to talk about people with faces painted.
No.
We're not here to talk about Kiss. We're here to talk about Arista Records. Let me grab the book here.
Yes, I don't have my book.
Looking for the Magic, Mitchell Cohen. Fun little book about the early history of Arista Records. Who are they responsible for? Well, I'm glad you asked, Heidi. Whitney Houston, Patti Smith, Gil Scott-Heron. They ended up signing the Kinks, sort of the revival of the Kinks, the Grateful Dead, Lou Reed, Barry Manilow. All of
Nikki
your favorites. Our friend, you're right.
There?
Our friend Nikki. So many, and it was fun talking with Mitchell about all of this because he was there for so much of it and got to kind of be in the room when they played some of these tracks for the first time. He was actually at the famed Lou Reed Take No Prisoners show at the Bottom Line, which as soon as I found that out, interview went off the rails, let's just put it politely. But we talk all about that. That book is available right now, and I love the shape of it. There's something kind of cool about it that makes it stick out.
I love the shape of it too.
That it is it is
the photos are amazing.
It's like a 45 size, right?
Yes.
Maybe? Yeah.
Bigger
A little bit big. No, it's bigger.
Yeah.
Somewhere between a 7, not a 33, not a 45.
It's just cool. It's a cool book. It can go on your coffee table. It can go on a nightstand easily. It's an easy read.
Yeah, it's lovely. have you been thinking about writing this book?
Yeah, the book had been on my mind for a while. People had asked me, occasionally, because I collaborated with Matt Pinfield on his memoir, and his agent, suggested that I might want to write something like that from my perspective as a music industry insider guy. But I never felt like I wanted to write my experiences in the music business. I didn't want to, because my experiences are unique to me, but there have been so many books. I mean, I'll be like, how I got into this, the rock stars I met, people I signed, or whatever.
Right.
But then BMG Books began doing a series called the RPM series of individual books on important, influential, independent record labels. They did one on Sub Pop. They did one on Specialty. They assigned one on Chrysalis. I know they were going to do Slash. So I found out who edited that RPM series and pitched the idea of doing a book on our first decade, essentially when it was a New York-based independently distributed record label. And because I thought that would give me a way to tell a lot of different stories. So I could tell the story, obviously, of Arista's inception, but also its pre-story of how it evolved out of, Bell, Amy, Mala Records. And also sort of take a snapshot of New York in the 70s, the music scene, the cultural scene in general. So I got the assignment to do the Arista book in the RPM series, and I worked on it for a year, interviewed about 25, 30 people, and delivered the book in February of 2020.
Famous last words.
Right before the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
I mean, just bang, it was on their desk. Bang, everything shut down. So then it was on hold for about a year. Then when everybody started getting back into the swing of things, there was a change at the top of BMG Books. The whole RPM series was canceled, and I was stuck with a book, and
right.
and no way to get it out there until I started talking with Ira Robbins at Trouser Press, who had been putting out books under the Trouser Press label. He and I began to talk, and that's how and where it ended up there.
And I mean, you said, like, it's interesting. Your book, I love it because there's not a lot of name drops in it. Or if they are, it's very germane to the story. It's not, like you said, some of the other books that have been out there that are very name droppy, and this party and this thing. And it just sounds...
yeah. First of all, I wanted to sort of keep myself out of it as a character. I mean, it's like I was there and I was an eyewitness to all the stuff during that decade of Arista, but I wanted it to be like a more universal story than just my experiences of walking in the door and meeting Clive Davis, or the first time I met Whitney, or Ray Davies, or Lou Reed. It's sort of like, because everybody in the business to some extent or another has those kind of encounters, and has the kind of job that brings them in proximity and stuff. And when people did ask me to write something more personal, more autobiographical, let's say, they always wanted to know the dirt. They wanted to, what really happened in Clive's office during this, and that, or when I was at Columbia. Then I was at Columbia after that, and it's like, oh, do you have any stories about Tommy Mottola and Mariah Carey or something like that? And I'm like, I'm not interested in telling those stories. I mean, even if I knew about them, it's not why I'm in the music business. And I feel like if you have a relationship with your colleagues and the artists you work with, some things should stay in the behind office doors. I mean, it's just I signed an artist named Maxwell at when I was at Columbia. A pretty important
he did okay for himself.
R&B artist. And people always wanted me to, like, well, what was it like? What was the demo process like? What was it like when you first delivered, this record to the R&B department. And I'm like, you know what? That's kind of attorney-client privilege. That's sort of like A&R guy, artist, all the things that go on, all the behind the scenes, obstacles and negotiations are not that interesting to me. I mean, I'm interested in the music and the marketing of the music, the promotion of the music, what the artist is trying to say, what the label stands for in this case. Not in like saying, oh yeah, this happened, that I should say at this party,
right.
Yeah, or this is the encounter that this publicist had with this artist during, say, Milli Vanilli or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And so during the early kind of formative days of Arista, you've got, like you say in the book, you've got Clive Davis kind of trying to not reinvent, but sort of rebuild himself and his brand and sort of show that he still has the skill given sort of the, I guess, do we say controversy that pushed him out at CBS?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we could definitely say controversy. Yeah, I mean, for people who might not know who are listening. Yeah, Clive Davis ran Columbia Records and Epic Records, but brought them headlong into the rock era. Signed artists like Big Brother and the Holding Company and Blood, Sweat, Tears and Santana, and I mean, Columbia had always been a powerhouse, but it was only tentatively becoming like a rock force. And then, after a period of great success from like 67 to 73, he lost his job at CBS Records under a cloud of scandal that really amounted to nothing, at the end of the day. So he spent a year, working on his book, and then, there was all this speculation in the music industry, like where would Clive Davis end up? What would be his next move? It wasn't like he was still a relatively young man, and had built this, let's call it an empire, and was he gonna do a joint label deal with Warner Brothers, or was he going to, and end up running, let's say, Capitol or something, or start something of his own? So when I was a rock writer at the time. I wasn't his profession by any means. But so when I found out that that Columbia Pictures had hired him to take over Bell Records, even I, as like just sort of like a on the sideline spectator, said, like, well, Bell Records, I know what Bell Records is. I mean, I had a bunch of their records in my collection for sure, but it had a reputation of being like a very, very pop label, very single driven label, and obviously that was not the way he wanted to keep it. He wanted to make it in his image,
right?
Which is to say, like a mini version of what he was doing over at CBS, a broad, album-oriented label that did rock and jazz and pop as well, of course. But so in a way, it was like his comeback story. Even though he hadn't been gone very long, for sure,
right?
To be sure, but it was sort of like validation of his abilities to spot talent and find hit songs, and to take a leap of faith on some artists that were not not on the surface necessarily mainstream type people. Patti Smith, Bill Scott Heron, Anthony Braxton, signed Lou Reed. After Lou Reed's thing at RCA, he signed the Kinks, who were also like in a sort of a slump at the time.
Yeah, the rebuilding
at RCA. He signed the Grateful Dead, who after a very good run at Warner Brothers was sort of floundering around trying to do things independently. So my job in telling this story was to talk to as many people as I could who were there during the transition And so it put me in contact with a lot of people that that had been my predecessors there, or my colleagues there, or producers that worked for him, or it was a fascinating process for someone who was interested in music history, music label history specifically.
Yeah. Now, as a complete aside, is Bell Records connected to Owl Bell? Because I know that Stax was so it's completely different. Okay.
Bell began as a children's label, and
Okay.
then was a label that did like knockoffs of top 40 hits that you would find like the Woolworths and stuff, like for like 39 cents, and then became quite a powerhouse. I mean, Bell, Amy, and Mala had a lot of hits, in mostly in pop and R&B. The box tops, and Del Shannon, and Mitch Riding Detroit Wheels, and James and Bobby Purify, and Lee Dorsey, and I mean, I certainly have a lot of those records in my collection, and everyone I know does. But
right.
But what was fascinating to me, in doing the research and digging through old issues of Billboard and Record World, was to find out that Larry Utall, who ran Bell Records, had a unique A&R philosophy, which is to say not to have an A&R department, per se, but he didn't make records. He made deals with people who made records. He made a deal with Marshall Sehorn and Alan Toussaint, who had a label down in New Orleans, or with Bob Crew, who brought him Rich Ryder and Norman Tanega and the Toys, and he made deals with the Memphis guys that brought him the Box Tops, or James and Bobby Purify. He would identify local sources of music, and then just trust the source to bring him product, and made a lot of trips to England, to pick up masters, to license to the U.S. with records that had already been made and distributed there. I had never seen anything like it, in reading those articles. Every label that you or I are familiar with on that scale, every independent label, from Town to A&M to Specialty to Jazz to Atlantic, with Barry Webster, the person at the top was essentially the A&R head. I mean, the person that you walked in the door, and Sam Phillips or Ahmed Erdogan or Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss or whatever, there was someone there who would make an assessment of the music and the artist and decide to sign the artist to the label. That's how it was always done. Larry Utall didn't do a lot of that. People didn't walk into his office and audition for him. If he went to see a showcase of an artist, it was very rare, because but he would, he would go to England and make deals with record makers like Mickey Most and Larry Page and Tony Visconti, or Dick James, and picked up some fascinating records along the way. I mean, the first Elton John single ever released in America was released on a subsidiary of Bell, that with deal that Larry Utall made with Dick James Music, DJM Records. And he had an option to put out the first Elton John album, but that single didn't sell, and he didn't see the upside of it. So, Elton John had to wait a little while and get signed to Uni, and the world knows what happened then. But it was fascinating, and certainly not the way Clive Davis worked. I mean, Clive Davis is the ultimate, label head as A&R guy. Every decision on every song that every artist records, if they're not songwriters. I mean, obviously he didn't tell Ray Davies or Patti Smith what to record, but when it came to the pop artist, certainly every song had to go through across his desk. He had to approve it. Every mix, every piece of artwork. I mean, he was the ultimate hands-on record executive. Larry Utall saw Bell as a promotion and marketing company of music, and that served him very well when he was putting out hits, and when the market was mostly top 40 driven. It didn't serve him so well in what I guess you would have to call like the post-Woodstock era. When
Right.
rock bands without pop hits couldn't like build up an underground following, and sell a lot of records, and get played on like what was then like album-oriented radio. It's like albums whose sales and success were not contingent on breaking a single top 40.
Right.
So it was like it was such a drastic shift in A&R philosophy.
How did Arista handle that, or Clive Davis, in that kind of changeover? And because, like you said, the artists that you were working with at the time, there are definitely some kind of bands that had singles and artists that had singles, and then you had people who were much more. I mean, someone like Patti Smith, yes, she's had hit singles, as it were, on those very niche things, but Horses is not a singles album.
Right, but certainly not until the third album. And,
right. Yeah.
I mean, but Horses was a landmark album, and it was handled as such from from the company's standpoint. The fact that the songs on Horses were not likely to get a lot of airplay was not from what I know from the people. I mean, I was a rock writer then, and I loved Horses. It was definitely my favorite album. And they would just there was a commitment behind her, and I saw her recently. She was at Clive Davis's 90th birthday party, and she went up and gave a little speech where she said that Clive just always let me be myself. He allowed that, and it's one thing that people sometimes overlook because he has such a reputation of being so involved. But
right.
when it came to all the artists on the jazz roster, when it came to artists like Patti or Gil Scott-Heron or Lou Reed or Ray Davies, there was none of that. He didn't try and give them outside songs. He very rarely would suggest a producer. I mean, sometimes he would, but but it wasn't like you have to work with this person. You're not going to tell Gil Scott-Heron or Patti Smith or Ray Davies.
Right.
He's not going to say to the Kings, "Oh, you have to work with Jimmy Iovine," or Ray Davies is going to make the decisions. I mean, it's his band. But and all that was like really fascinating stuff. Just as like I said, as someone to whom the history of pop music is like my thing. It's sort of like it's to be able to tell a very specific story that also is about New York City in the 70s and everything that was going on musically, jazz, new wave, disco, and funk, and it was definitely fun to do that, and I was glad I found a premise on which to explore that stuff.
And New York is such a character in the book, like you mentioned, because of so many of the artists that are based out of there and that were doing things there. I mean, obviously Lou Reed and Patti Smith are kind of synonymous with Manhattan, but even Whitney Houston was in the area.
Whitney's from Jersey. Patti is from Jersey. Barry Manilow and Melissa Manchester on the other side of the coin. Clive himself is from New York City. He's from Brooklyn. It's sort of like I point this out in the book, and I said you wouldn't necessarily think they have a lot in common, but Barry Manilow and Lou Reed do have a bunch of stuff in common. They're both from Brooklyn. They're only about a year apart in age.
As songwriters for hire to start, and
Jewish guys who, in an earlier era, may have been like brill building or 1650 songwriters, and unless artists who came up in some version of the underground, whether it's like the Velvet Underground specifically, or the Continental Baths, where Manilow came up as there's accompanist. I mean, there are more like parallels there than in those two artists than anybody, Barry Manilow and Lou Reed could not be more opposite, and yet they ended up on the same record label. You know what? Like I said, it's like at one point, Barry Manilow might have been Neil Sedaka, and maybe Lou Reed would have been Doc Thomas or something. It's like you could see that. It's like, oh, if they'd have been 10 years earlier, what the paths might have been, and they might have crossed paths, in the Brill Building.
In the process, I think you said this was your first label job.
Yeah, it was my
right?
first. Yeah.
And then going on to other things afterwards and other labels, did you kind of realize, I guess in the moment, did you realize what a special, unique blend of artists you were
that's why
being around?
I mean, I thought I was going to work for the coolest record company in the world. I mean, obviously there were a lot of very, very cool record companies in the mid '70s.
Yeah.
But like I said, I loved Horses, and and the Kinks were one of my favorite bands, and they had signed Martha Reeves and General Johnson and Gil Scott-Heron, and I was a big fan of Monty Python, and
that's right, yeah.
They had a Monty Python album. They signed the Grateful Dead, and in college I had gone through the Grateful Dead period. There was all that cool stuff coming out on the jazz side.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh yeah, great. I mean, this is exactly the kind of label I want to work for. I mean, I started out as a copywriter, writing, bios and press releases, and then like ads and stuff. And then after the period covered by this book, I asked for a shot at the so I ended up there, and we've done to Columbia.
So, and that's the other thing that I didn't know much about the jazz side of Arista. And when you're going through one, you've listed a bunch of them already, the artists who are on that label, and the way that so many of these records were sort of, I mean, there's the kind of compilation ones that were just like,
the one
we got someone to record for 3 days,
the
and
on Savoy. I mean,
it's fascinating.
I acquired the Savoy catalog, and every few months we would get a stack of those records. Lester Young and Charlie Parker, and Stan Getz and Dizzy Gillespie. It's like it was just like it was a gold mine of stuff, and it was a prestige thing to have, and a lot of our friends, my friends specifically, were rock writers or music writers, and they would love to come up to the office and like, oh, what's new, and what's the new Savoy stuff, the Roots of Rock and Roll album, or the Black California album, or bebop piano album. Just I mean, those things were like beautifully packaged and compiled and annotated, and Clive again, to his credit, one thing he wanted to make sure of was that these were handled with the prestige that they deserved, and that people would get paid, that royalties would get paid, that track those people down and make sure they make money off of this, because notoriously, the head of Savoy, like Herman Lubinsky, was he was like a notorious skinflint, and people hated working for him, and that's why there had to be so many compilation albums, because there were so many artists that didn't stick around long enough to make complete albums. They would make like 2 sides for him or 4 sides for him, and then like I've Had It. So there were all these masters sitting there that had no albums attached to them, and so albums had to be created like thematically. It was a great series of stuff, and the stuff that Michael Caspuna was doing over at Novus with Steve Backer was just like groundbreaking stuff. Oliver Lake and Cecil Taylor and Gato Barbieri and Rand Blake. I mean, people, the Twin Peaks of Arista, Barry Manilow, Whitney Houston,
right,
Kenny G, like in the middle there and stuff, but. And like one of the things I wanted to do when I was writing this was, sort of do like historical, calling it this a historical remix. You know, it's like I'm not ignoring, you know, all the, you know, pop success I have, but I wanted to bring other things up in the mix. I wanted people to hear, you know, be aware of all this other stuff that was going on. It's like, oh, I didn't hear that piano part on that in that version, but now I hear it. Yeah, that's what it was to me. That's sort of like I'm taking the elements of the Arista story. Look, Clive wrote his own book, which very, very thoroughly and, you know, in great detail discusses his perspective of, you know, of Arista's history. I wanted to shed some light on some other parts of the story that have not been told that much. You know, sort of flashlight in a different corner. You know, it's like Willie Nile or David Foreman, or, you know, I mean, albums that deserve more attention that they got. So
when you had all the stiff label stuff coming over.
Yeah, there was that too. Yeah, I remember I'd been so excited because it was I had just begun at Arista. I was still a rock writer at the time, and I got an import copy of Elvis Costello's "My Aim Was True," and I reviewed it for Cream magazine. And so I was so excited when I heard that we were trying to bring the stiff record label to the Arista of the United States, and it's not the better thing. But then the two principal holders of stiff had a professional divorce. One ended up with Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe, and brought those guys over to Columbia. We got the stiff deal, but we got the stiff deal without Elvis and Nick, which was a shame, because obviously I would have liked to have written the original stuff on Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe.
Certainly.
That would have been a kick. But yeah, it was.
And Lou Reed had such a unique and interesting career with so many ups and downs, but Arista had was Sally Can't Dance on Arista? I'm trying to remember now.
No,
that was the RCA. But
we did Rock and Roll Heart, Street Hassle,
and then
Prisoners, The Bells.
And that's the one I wanted to ask about, the Take No Prisoners.
Oh my God, I was there at the bottom line.
You were? Wow.
Yeah, we all were. It's like, you know, he was just like, it was some weird combination of music and stand up and you know, and it's just like, you know, he would use the songs. It's like some songs he would do like as songs and do like really compelling versions of, and some he would just use as riffs over which to sort of, you know, verbally like spritz, like, you know.
I was gonna say complain, but spritz is a better way to describe it. Yeah.
You know, he's got that Lenny Bruce thing in his voice, and and sort of like rail against whatever was on his mind at the time. And the fact that he delivered that as a live album was just hilarious to me. That you know, it's like, here it is. Here's my because at the time, you have to place this in context, the late 70s, you know, the double live album, you know, every artist had to have one. I mean, after Frampton Comes Alive, I mean,
right, yeah,
you know, like every artist, the double live album. That's, you know, that's every rock artist needed one. And of course, when an artist had been on other labels before, you want at least some versions in your catalog of their biggest songs. So theoretically, Arista would have gotten versions of, like, you know, Sweet Jane and Rock and Roll, or I'm Waiting for My Man, or whatever. It's like that we could market. And instead he delivered this 2-album, that part tirade, part comedy record, or, you know, but also some beautifully played versions of some great songs. So it's quite a document. I don't think there's anything else quite like it.
And to go back to, I mean, my mind is blown by the album, because, like, knowing Lou Reed, knowing the Velvet Underground, this is this weird anomaly where his sense of humor really comes through. I mean, loud and clear.
Yeah, he was funny. I mean, he just was.
But, like, was everyone expecting this? Did everyone know, like, this tour, or was that just one gig?
Obviously, it was like a run of shows at the bottom line, and everyone knew what he was up to on stage. But the assumption was that all that would be edited out, and he would deliver,
right.
From each night there would be a certain number of songs that would be like songs, that he would compile. He and his producer, engineer, or whoever he was working with at the time. But Clive did, give complete creative control to people like Lou Reed and Patti Smith. That you put out what they brought in the door, and what Lou Reed brought in the door was Take No Prisoners, and it took it is in its way like hilarious and as you said, like just a one of a kind thing.
And it's weird. I feel like it's not appreciated as much as, say, like Metal Machine music, which everyone always goes to as like
everyone goes
the ultimate kiss off
the
of
anomaly. And
yeah.
As the FU to like expectations.
Right.
Sort of like you think I'm gonna follow up this with that, and I'm gonna take this turn. Take No Prisoners is probably like I can only imagine the discussions between Clive or whoever Lou's product manager was. It's like, okay, we're going to book the Bottom Line for a week. Are you going to do shows? We'd love to get a double live album out by whatever month.
It sounds like a Christmas record.
Yeah, maybe put under the tree.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just one of those records that it's just like you play it for people, or you discuss it, and people go, "Really? That's what's on it?" I'm like, "Yeah." He talks about rock critics for about
Rails and Robert Christcow for a while,
things like John Rockwell, the Times, and Christcow gave me a B+, and it's like okay. I mean, it's your record. Say what you want.
As we're kind of wrapping up, again, like you said, the book covers both your time at Arista and sort of the overall early era of the record. Is there one album that came out while you were working there that you sort of feel like was your high point, and like, I can't believe I got to be involved in some small way in the creation of this record?
I wasn't involved with the making of Easter in any way. I wasn't an A&R guy yet, but I was a huge fan of Patty's, and she had just recovered from her accident. She had fallen off the stage on tour when she was promoting Radio Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
And she was making this record, and she was coming back, and I went to meet her, and interview her. She still had the brace on her neck. I went to meet her at 1/5 Avenue to start to do all the pre-press things, and that was like a thrill for me. And I brought her book with like a written book of poetry. She signed it. And the night that she premiered Because the Night, I was in the audience. It was it was over the Christmas holiday, so this would be late 1977, and everyone knew that she was working on something, but no one had heard anything from it. And a few of us from Arista who were fans and didn't go away for Christmas were there at the show, and she debuted this song, and Springsteen came out and sang it with her, and we all looked at each other like, this is the record that she's been waiting for, the record that Arista's been waiting for. We couldn't wait to get back to the office and tell people what Patty had. That you're going to be so thrilled. I mean, she had always wanted to be on Top 40 radio. I mean, that was always like the secret, not so secret, but it's like she wanted to be played on WABC. That's how she grew up. She grew up in the New York City area. She wanted to be on WABC radio. And when we heard Because the Night, we were like, oh my God, this is the one. This is the third album thing that you wait for. This is, for lack of a better comparison, like her Born to Run, like on Spring third album, or whatever, Refugee on Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers third album, like the song that just is the next level thing. And it was so perfect because, I mean, it wasn't a song that anyone gave her. It was a song that, well, Springsteen gave it to her, but then she, reworked it, made it her own. And I talked to Lenny Kaye about it, and Lenny walked me through a little bit of the how it went from the embryonic cassette to what happened in the studio. And he's like, yeah, we made it our own. We're like proud to do it. We'll do it every night. We stand behind that song. And, just to be, you don't get those moments very often. You hear something for the first time and just know that, oh yeah, this is going to be it. This is going to take over the world. Some tracks by Whitney were like that. I mean, for me, like How Will I Know was like that. Just being in the room when Clive played it for the first time, you go like, oh, I get it. Or then when I was at Columbia, the first time I heard Crazy in Love by Beyonce, in an A&R meeting, you go like, oh, everyone in the world is going to be hearing this song in a few weeks. Those moments, those are the ones. I mean, those are the ones that stick with you when you go like, oh, we're here, in this little room, experiencing this together, and soon it's going to just blow up.
Looking for the Magic, New York City, the 70s, and the Rise of Arista Records by Mitchell Cohen is available right now from Trouser Press Books wherever you get your books. For more information, check out the Trouser Press website, trouserpressbooks.com. You can also follow them on Twitter, where they're at Trouser Press, and on Facebook, where they're at facebook.com/trouserpressbooks.
You can check us out on all the various socials. Be sure to visit our website at rockandrollgradschool.com, and don't forget to leave us a review.
Today's show is produced by myself and Heidi Hedquist. Our reluctant producers are John Sauvé and Sandy Stone. Our willing producers are Rachel Allen and Randy Jeanette. Our intern is Zach Jackson. This one's for Philippe. Thank you, good night, and may all your favorite bands stay together.